Good morning, afternoon, everyone. I want to talk today about something that we've all experienced in some form or another, feeling ignored, misunderstood, or distant from someone we care about. There's a common assumption that when someone loves you, they'll always be there, present, engaged. But what happens when the person who loves you seems to withdraw, to retreat into silence? It's easy to internalize that silence and think it's about us, that somehow we're not worthy, that we did something wrong. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. In a world that celebrates strength, resilience, and stoicism, vulnerability can feel like the last thing we should embrace. It is frequently seen as a weakness, something that leaves us exposed, fragile, or open to hurt. We're taught to hide our fears, our insecurities, and our uncertainties. We're encouraged to put on a mask and present a polished version of ourselves to the world. But the truth is, vulnerability is not a weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most profound strengths we can cultivate. To be vulnerable is to show up as our true selves, without the protective armor of perfection. It is about letting go of the need to appear invincible or infallible. When we embrace vulnerability, we allow ourselves to be seen in our entirety, not just our successes, but also our struggles, our doubts, and our fears. And in that space, something extraordinary happens. We create connection. At its core, vulnerability invites authenticity. When we choose to be vulnerable, we are giving others permission to do the same. We stop pretending to have it all together, and in doing so, we make room for genuine, real conversations. Vulnerability isn't about being open for the sake of exposure. It's about being open to the possibility of deeper relationships, greater empathy, and mutual understanding. It's about saying, I'm not perfect, but I'm here, and I trust you enough to share my true self with you. But here's the thing, vulnerability takes courage. It's not easy to be raw or unguarded, especially when the stakes feel high. The fear of judgment or rejection often holds us back. We may feel that if we reveal too much, we risk being hurt or misunderstood. Yet the paradox of vulnerability is that, while it can make us feel exposed, it's also the path to emotional freedom. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we free ourselves from the need for approval, perfection, or control. We stop living in fear of being found out, and we start embracing the fullness of who we are, imperfections, flaws, and all. The idea of vulnerability as strength might seem counterintuitive, but consider this: how many of us have ever experienced a moment when someone opened up to us in a raw, honest way, and we were moved by their courage? How many times have we felt a deeper connection with someone who was willing to show us their true selves? Vulnerability in this sense fosters intimacy. It allows us to see each other not just as figures on a pedestal, but as real, complex people with unique experiences, fears, and dreams. When we're vulnerable, we're also giving others permission to be vulnerable too. It's a ripple effect. One person's openness can break down walls and inspire others to be authentic. And in relationships, whether personal or professional, this kind of vulnerability lays the foundation for trust. Trust is the cornerstone of any meaningful connection, and trust is built on the willingness to be vulnerable. When we trust others enough to be ourselves, without pretense or masks, we invite them to do the same. Now, vulnerability doesn't mean oversharing or bearing all our wounds without discretion. It's about being discerning, choosing the right moments and the right people with whom to be vulnerable. It's also about recognizing that vulnerability is a choice, a conscious decision to open up, to take the risk of being seen for who we really are without knowing exactly how others will respond. It's about embracing the discomfort of uncertainty and stepping forward anyway. In relationships, especially, vulnerability is crucial. If we want to build deep, lasting connections, we must be willing to lean into the discomfort of vulnerability. This is not just about being emotionally open, but also about being willing to face our own imperfections and mistakes. When we are vulnerable, we are acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, that we are still learning, growing, and evolving. This humanness, this imperfection, is what makes us relatable. It's what allows others to see us as more than just a list of achievements or titles, but as individuals with experiences that have shaped us and continue to shape us. However, vulnerability also requires a sense of self-worth. To truly be vulnerable, we need to believe that we are worthy of love and connection, even with our imperfections. If we don't feel worthy, we may withhold parts of ourselves, hiding behind armor that prevents others from truly seeing us. But when we embrace our worthiness, we stop pretending. We stop pretending to be perfect, to have it all together, and we start showing up as our authentic selves. At its core, vulnerability is not about weakness. It is about courage. It's about the courage to be seen, to be real, to show up as you are even when you're unsure of what the outcome will be. It's about trusting that your true self is enough, just as you are, and that being open to others with kindness, honesty, and compassion is a strength, not a flaw. So let's redefine what it means to be strong. Strength is not about hiding our feelings or acting like we don't need anyone. Strength is about embracing our vulnerability, knowing that it is through our openness that we can create the most profound connections. Strength is about having the courage to stand in our truth, no matter how messy it may seem, and to trust that by doing so, we are not only showing our strength, but we are inviting others to do the same. In our lives and relationships, there is often a space between us and the people we care about, a space that can feel uncomfortable, confusing, or even painful. This space isn't always physical, it's emotional, psychological, and relational. It's the gap between two people who may be experiencing different feelings, different needs, or different perspectives. And yet, it's important to recognize that this space, though it can sometimes feel like a void, holds incredible potential for growth, understanding, and connection. When we encounter distance in a relationship, whether it's due to conflict, silence, or simply a period of emotional withdrawal, it's easy to fill that space with assumptions, worries, and stories about what might be happening on the other side. We might imagine that the distance means something negative, like a lack of love, or fear that the relationship is faltering. But in truth, the space between people is not inherently negative. In fact, it's in these moments of distance that some of the most important work in relationships happens. One of the first things we must do when we experience this space is to resist the urge to fill it with our own anxieties and assumptions. Often, when we feel distant from someone, we project our own insecurities or fears into that space. We may assume the worst, thinking that the person is upset with us, that they no longer care, or that they are pulling away permanently. However, this space doesn't always signify trouble. It may simply be a natural pause in a relationship, a moment of reflection or personal growth. The space could be an opportunity for both people to process their emotions, recalibrate, and gain clarity. To understand the space between us, we must first cultivate a mindset of curiosity and compassion. Rather than jumping to conclusions or reading too much into the distance, we can ask ourselves, what is the other person experiencing? What might they need right now? How can we approach this space with empathy and patience rather than fear or frustration? The space between us can also be an invitation for self-reflection. When someone withdraws or when there is silence in the relationship, it's an opportunity for us to check in with ourselves. What do we need in this moment? Are we feeling insecure or anxious? Are we projecting our own fears into the distance? In these moments of space, we can learn to turn inward, to ask ourselves what is really going on within us, rather than immediately assuming that the space is caused by something external. It's also essential to recognize that not all space is about conflict or problems. Sometimes space is necessary for growth, both individually and within the relationship. People need time to process their thoughts and emotions. Space can be a sign of someone's need for personal reflection or the space to work through something they are experiencing on their own. This doesn't mean that the person doesn't care. It means they are processing something in a way that is private and personal. In fact, this kind of space can actually strengthen a relationship. When both people respect each other's need for space and time, it fosters an environment where both individuals can grow independently. This personal growth can later enrich the connection as each person brings their own renewed sense of self to the relationship. Rather than feeling threatened by the space, we can choose to embrace it as a sign that both people are working on themselves, growing and evolving. The space between us also teaches us the value of patience and trust. Trust that the other person will come back, that the relationship is not defined by this temporary distance. Just as we need time and space to grow, so do others. And in giving others that space, we also honor their individual process. We trust that they are doing the work they need to do, and when the time is right, they will re-engage, often with more clarity, insight, and strength than before. This concept of understanding the space between us also applies to the importance of boundaries. Healthy boundaries are a form of respect in relationships, and sometimes the space between people is necessary to establish those boundaries. It's important to recognize when we need space to recharge, reflect, or gain emotional clarity. It's equally important to understand when someone else needs that space. By recognizing and respecting boundaries, we create a dynamic where both people can function at their best individually and together. The space between people is also an opportunity for deepened connection. When we honor that space without rushing to fill it with assumptions or judgments, we create the potential for more meaningful communication. Rather than trying to force connection, we allow for the organic flow of relationship. In this way, space isn't something to fear or avoid, but something to embrace as part of the ebb and flow of life and love. Finally, understanding the space between us requires emotional maturity. It asks us to acknowledge that relationships are not always linear, and that not every moment will be filled with intense connection or closeness. The gaps, the silences, and the distance are part of the natural rhythm of life. Understanding that love isn't always expressed in constant communication, and that sometimes absence or silence is as important as presence, gives us the emotional maturity to weather those moments without panicking or overreacting. When we understand the space between us, we learn to navigate our relationships with greater resilience. We don't see the distance as a threat, but as an opportunity. We understand that space can be a pause for reflection, growth, and renewal. And when the time is right, we know that the connection will return, often with greater depth and clarity than before. In the end, the space between us is not something to fear. It is a space that holds possibility. It's the gap where growth happens, where trust is built, and where both individuals can become stronger, more self-aware, and more connected. And when we learn to understand this space, we create relationships that are not only deeper and more meaningful, but also healthier, more resilient, and more compassionate. In life and relationships, we often encounter moments that challenge us, moments that leave us feeling vulnerable, uncertain, or even hurt. These are the times when we feel like closing ourselves off, shutting down emotionally, pulling back, or erecting walls to protect ourselves from further pain or disappointment. It's a natural instinct to close ourselves off when we feel threatened, misunderstood, or rejected. But what if, instead of closing ourselves off, we had the courage to stay open, to remain emotionally available, even when it feels hard? Staying open requires a kind of bravery that many of us don't always acknowledge. It asks us to resist the temptation to retreat into our shells or to numb ourselves to the world. It calls for us to face our fears head on, to confront our discomfort, and to embrace the unknown. The courage to stay open is not about being passive or complacent. It's about actively choosing vulnerability in moments of uncertainty, when it feels like the easier path would be to shut down. The fear of being hurt. One of the primary reasons we tend to close ourselves off is the fear of being hurt. It's a protective instinct our minds and bodies are wired to shield us from pain, from the possibility of rejection, betrayal, or failure. And while this instinct can serve us in moments of true danger, in the realm of relationships and personal growth, this protective mechanism can actually hinder us. When we close ourselves off to others, when we guard our hearts too tightly, we not only protect ourselves from pain, but we also shut ourselves off from love, connection, and growth. The risk of being hurt is real, but so is the reward of building deep, authentic connections. In the same way that we can be hurt by others, we can also experience profound moments of joy, understanding, and intimacy. By staying open, we give ourselves the opportunity to experience both the vulnerability and the beauty that come with human connection. Staying open to new experiences. Staying open also means being willing to embrace the unknown, to step outside of our comfort zones, and to open ourselves up to new experiences. Life is full of unexpected twists and turns, and the only way to navigate it with grace is to stay open to what comes next. When we close ourselves off, we limit our potential for growth and discovery. We block ourselves from the lessons, people, and opportunities that might be waiting just beyond our fears. Think about the moments in your life when you took a risk, when you stepped into the unknown, and what you learned from those experiences. Often it's in the moments where we stay open, when we say yes to a new opportunity, when we speak our truth in the face of discomfort, when we engage in a conversation that challenges our views, that we experience the most profound growth. Staying open requires us to trust that, even if we don't know what the outcome will be, we can handle whatever comes our way. Emotional resilience. The courage to stay open is also about building emotional resilience. It's easy to close ourselves off when we've been hurt or disappointed, but staying open means that we allow ourselves to feel the pain, the sadness, or the anger without letting it define us or lock us into a cycle of negativity. Emotional resilience doesn't mean suppressing our emotions or pretending that everything is fine when it's not. It means acknowledging and experiencing our emotions fully and then choosing to remain open to the possibility of healing, growth, and connection. When we stay open, we don't let our emotions become walls that separate us from others. Instead, we use them as tools for understanding both ourselves and the people around us. It takes courage to allow ourselves to feel deeply, to experience the highs and lows of life without closing off or retreating. But when we stay open, we create space for ourselves to process our emotions, learn from them, and ultimately emerge stronger and more connected to others. The power of compassionate openness. Staying open also means remaining open to others, especially when they may be going through difficult times of their own. It's easy to close ourselves off to others when we feel misunderstood or when we don't receive the support we need. But the courage to stay open means choosing compassion. Even when we're struggling ourselves, it's about being willing to see the humanity in others, to offer a listening ear, and to extend kindness when it's needed most. Compassionate openness doesn't mean sacrificing our boundaries or tolerating mistreatment. It's about maintaining our emotional availability while also respecting ourselves and others. When we stay open in this way, we cultivate an environment of mutual understanding and empathy. We allow ourselves to be both strong and vulnerable, to offer support while also receiving it. In doing so, we build a foundation of trust that enables us to navigate the challenges of relationships with grace and compassion. The freedom to be authentic. At its heart, staying open is about being true to ourselves. It's about embracing who we are, flaws, imperfections, and all, and allowing ourselves to show up as we are in the world. When we close ourselves off, we often do so because we're afraid of being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. But staying open allows us to be authentic. It allows us to speak our truth, to express our needs, and to live in alignment with our values. The courage to stay open means we stop hiding behind masks or pretending to be something we're not. We let go of the need for external validation and trust that, by being ourselves, we will attract the people and experiences that truly resonate with who we are. This kind of openness creates space for real, authentic connections where we can be seen and loved for exactly who we are. The risk and reward of staying open. Of course, staying open comes with its risks. It means that we expose ourselves to the possibility of pain, disappointment, or failure, but the reward of staying open far outweighs the fear. When we stay open, we allow ourselves to experience the richness of life in its fullest form. We embrace the potential for love, connection, growth, and transformation. We give ourselves the chance to evolve, to learn, and to become the best versions of ourselves. The courage to stay open isn't about being fearless. It's about being willing to step into the unknown, to face the discomfort, and to trust that we can handle whatever comes our way. It's about showing up with a willingness to be vulnerable, to face our fears, and to embrace life as it unfolds. By staying open, we create space for ourselves to experience the beauty of life in all its complexity, its joy, its sorrow, and its infinite possibilities. In the end, staying open is an act of trust. Trust in ourselves, trust in others, and trust in the process of life itself. It's the belief that even in the face of uncertainty or adversity, we are capable of handling whatever comes our way. And it's this trust, this openness that ultimately leads us to the most fulfilling and meaningful experiences of all. At the core of a healthy and empowered life is the understanding that our sense of self-worth is not determined by how others treat us or by the actions of those around us. This idea is fundamental to building emotional resilience, fostering self-love, and living authentically. Yet, for many of us, this is one of the hardest lessons to internalize. We are often conditioned to tie our value to external validation, whether it's approval from others, recognition for our achievements, or the way people respond to us emotionally. We live in a world that constantly tells us we must measure up, that we must meet certain standards of success, beauty, or achievement in order to be worthy. These external markers, however, are fleeting and subjective. People's opinions of us, their actions toward us, and even their love for us are all influenced by factors outside of our control. So if we base our sense of self-worth on others' actions, we open ourselves up to a never-ending cycle of self-doubt, frustration, and emotional turmoil. The reality is, our worth is intrinsic. It's not something that can be earned, given, or taken away based on how others perceive us. The danger of external validation. External validation is seductive. It's easy to rely on compliments, praise, or approval from others to feel good about ourselves. Whether it's a like on social media, a promotion at work, or affection from a loved one, these external affirmations give us a temporary sense of worth. They boost our ego, provide a sense of accomplishment, and help us feel seen and valued. However, the danger of relying on this type of validation is that it's unpredictable and unstable. The people around us are not always going to affirm us in the ways we desire. They may be preoccupied with their own struggles, may not see us the way we see ourselves, or may simply have different expectations. If we allow our sense of worth to hinge on how others treat us, we are essentially handing over the reins of our happiness and self-acceptance to external forces. This leaves us vulnerable to disappointment and emotional instability because we are dependent on factors that we cannot control. In fact, when we tie our self-worth to others' actions, we are giving away our power. We allow the behaviors and judgments of others to dictate how we feel about ourselves, which is not only emotionally draining, but also disempowering. Our self-worth becomes something that is outside of us, something that can fluctuate with the whims of others. The power of internal validation. On the other hand, when we recognize that our self-worth is intrinsic, rooted in who we are as human beings, not in what we do or how others respond to us, we reclaim our power. We no longer need external validation to feel good about ourselves. We come to understand that we are inherently valuable simply because we exist. Our worth is not conditional upon our successes, our appearance, or the approval of others. Internal validation comes from the deep, unwavering belief that we are worthy of love, respect, and happiness, regardless of external circumstances. This means knowing that you are deserving of kindness, not because you've earned it through your actions, but because you are fundamentally deserving of respect simply for being yourself. This shift in perspective allows us to navigate the world with more confidence and self-assurance. We no longer seek out constant affirmation or approval because we have already affirmed ourselves. When we rely on internal validation, we develop a more stable sense of self-worth. We can handle criticism without it devastating us. We can face rejection without questioning our value. We can experience setbacks without losing faith in ourselves. Internal validation means we are our own greatest supporters and advocates, and we have the ability to nurture and cultivate our sense of self-worth from within, no matter what happens around us. The role of self-compassion. A critical aspect of developing internal validation is practicing self-compassion. Self-compassion is the practice of treating ourselves with kindness, understanding, and patience, especially in moments of failure or when we fall short of our expectations. It's about recognizing that we are human, that we will make mistakes, that we are imperfect, and that we don't always get it right. But in these moments, we can choose to be gentle with ourselves rather than harsh or self-critical. Self-compassion allows us to separate our actions from our self-worth. When we make a mistake or experience failure, it doesn't mean we are failures as people. It simply means we are learning, growing, and evolving. We can view ourselves through a lens of compassion, acknowledging our imperfections without allowing them to define us. This is the foundation of true self-worth, understanding that we are worthy of love and respect, no matter what we do or how others behave toward us. Releasing the need for approval. Another critical part of building self-worth is learning to release the need for constant approval. We live in a culture where validation from others is often seen as a measure of success or achievement. From childhood, we are taught to seek approval from our parents, teachers, and peers. As we grow older, we continue to seek approval from bosses, colleagues, and friends. While feedback and constructive criticism are important, the constant need for approval can become a trap. It can lead us to compromise our values, ignore our own needs, or make decisions based on what we think others will like rather than what is right for us. Releasing the need for approval means giving ourselves permission to live authentically without constantly measuring ourselves against others' expectations. It means making choices based on our own desires and values rather than trying to win external validation. The process of releasing approval-seeking behavior takes practice and requires us to confront the deep-seated belief that our worth is tied to others' opinions. As we practice living authentically, we learn to trust ourselves more. We begin to recognize that we are enough, just as we are, and that we don't need anyone else's approval to validate our worth. In doing so, we create the space to be our truest, most fulfilled selves, cultivating a deep sense of worth. The most empowering realization we can make is that our worth is not dependent on anyone else's actions, words, or feelings. We are worthy simply because we exist, because we are human beings, deserving of respect, love, and compassion. When we internalize this truth, we free ourselves from the constant need to prove ourselves, to seek others' validation, or to measure our value against the ever-changing standards of the outside world. Instead of seeking external validation, we learn to validate ourselves. We acknowledge our strengths, honor our weaknesses, and treat ourselves with the same kindness and respect we would offer to others. When we embrace the truth that our self-worth comes from within, we begin to live with a sense of peace and confidence that cannot be shaken by the actions or judgments of others. In the end, self-worth isn't something to be earned or proven. It is something to be recognized, nurtured, and celebrated. And when we fully understand this, we can live from a place of authenticity, independence, and inner strength. As we close today, I want to leave you with this powerful truth: your worth is not defined by the actions of others, nor is it determined by the fleeting opinions and judgments of those around you. Your value is intrinsic. It exists simply because you are, and that is enough. You are deserving of love, respect, and happiness, not because you've earned it in someone else's eyes, but because you are human, full of potential, complexity, and beauty. It's time to stop seeking approval from others to measure our worth. Instead, let's look within, practice self-compassion, and embrace the truth that we are enough as we are. The courage to stand in our own value, regardless of external circumstances, is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. Remember, your self-worth is not a destination to be achieved, but a truth to be lived every single day. Stand tall in it. Own it. And when the world around you feels uncertain, let your own belief in your worth be the anchor that keeps you grounded. Thank you.